வெல்கம் டு லிட்பிட் சேனல். இன்றைக்கி ரேட் ஆஃப் ஸ்ப்ரிங் பை ஆர்த்தர் மில்லரோடைய சம்மரி தான் பார்க்க போகிறோம். ஸோ சம்மரியோட ஃபர்ஸ்ட் கொஷின், அனலைஸ் மில்லர் ஆட்டிடியூட் இன் ஆல் டுவர்ட்ஸ் வெஜிடபிள் கார்டனிங். In introduction part, Miller in his short essay Rate of Spring tells about his love and recurrence for gardening. Miller used the title from musical ballad of Russian composer. The Russian composer Stravinsky ballad's English title, The Rate of Spring, is about the pageant ritual in which a girl danced before being sacrificed. The wise elder of the pageant society are seated in the circle and are observing the dance. Later, they are observing the girl as a sacrifice to the god of spring in order to gain his blessing. The word rite means sad ceremony or act. Here, Miller tells called gardening as ceremony that is done in the spring. Next topic of the essay, boring task of cultivation. The writer begins the essay by stating that in spite of knowing the reason for gardening, he has been cultivating vegetable in his garden for the past 36 years. He knows well that buying vegetable is comparatively cheap and easy task than cultivating it is in the garden. It requires complete attention as well. On the other hand, he does not like eating vegetables. Instead, he prefers to have hot dogs. If the present day's tasty food could be cultivated in the garden, he would do that without a second thoughts. But cultivating vegetable in the garden was boring task for him, despite that he loves garden. Next topic of summary, nature pleasures to cultivation. In the month of April, he dreams about not planting anything, but soon nature's signs call him for gardening. Firstly, a scent of earth tempts him. Secondly, the sun's brights and the birds screaming. And finally, the worms in the melting soil invites him to the task of gardening. He shares at the soil of his garden not only with the pleasures but with conflicts as well. The pleasures is about cultivate something in the garden, and the conflicts is about choice making, that is which method to be followed. Next one, he rejects black plastic and chemical fertilizer. The past years he had been using 36-inch widened black plastic between rows to keep the soil moist in the dry times and to keep the garden wet free. Thought it was useful, it looks unromantic. The writer feels the black plastic in the garden gives industrial look. Hence, this times he prefers a mulch than plastic as an improve the soil composer. Gardening also enables one to be knowledgeable about the various types of soil in the small landscapes and how sensitive it is. The uses of chemical fertilizer will reduce the richness of the soil. He reclaims that he will not be used fertilizer more, and he is not sure about the reason for it. He does not know why he used very little fertilizer. Maybe he does not want to spend too much of fertilizer, or maybe he does not want the weeds to thrive on fertilizer. But certainly it helped him in learning nature. Moral occupation of gardening. He calls the attraction of gardening as a neurotic for some and moral for others. It saves one from feeling pointless about life and difficult to grasp something. Gardening also brings out one's parental care as the plants' lives completely depends upon the gardener. In other case, the plants like squash and cucumber may endanger the likes the turning up in the massive number. Miller calls gardening as a moral occupation as it makes one seed to be ambitious. By April, one will be ambitious to keep a neat garden like the one of the catalogs. But by July, the unthinned plants brings chores. That time his wife comes as a remedier. Now, as the mistress of the gardener, she decides which plants to live by moving through row-wise. Mother-in-law as a botanist. By this time, his mother-in-law makes her first visit to the garden. He used to the woman who spoke her mind and who was always straightforward in her speech. But now she has learned from experience that it was not wise to be do so. Now she has changes that instead of giving suggestions about planting by that, she would wait till October when he makes her annual trip to her home. Her advice by October is of no use that upsets the narrator to decide not to plant anything next time. In spite of such decision, the thoughts of emptiness of the garden motivates him to plant again. The sight of dozens of green shades leaves glittering in the sun, beautiful vegetables are lovelier to admire than the hot dogs. Here, the writer changes his mind by preferring pans over hot dogs. This healthy growth reflects in orderliness in one's own spite as well. Thus, the writer changes his mind by accepting the April for this gardening. Gardening is not a simple task. Now, the writer changes his opinion once again by claiming that gardening is pointless, time consuming hobby. He further states that he does not understand why people love gardening because gardening is not a simple hobby or a habit of love, but it is about a character building. A garden can be seen as an extension of oneself. It is a place where determination will continue. It also allows one to accept one's mistakes. It helps in character building. Gardening is not a simple task, but it means more than is why Adam is a gardener. The gardener can become hopeful after repeated failure. He believes that this year will have a good harvest, even though there might be disaster like drought, flood, and traffic. In conclusion part, God has done his job properly and chosen the right occupation for mankind because only man can regain hope after repeated failures, believing in new and better possibility. He concludes this essay by stating that he wrote it in the coolest day of December. He might want his reader to justify his lack of interest in garden as a result of climate, yet he pointed out the role of gardening in the character building. Next question. What qualifies Millers to write on vegetable gardening? The speaker begins with the descriptions of his garden after he bought his first house in the country. He examines the mixed and difficult 36 years long relationship that he had cultivated with his vegetable garden. He questions arise regarding the hobby of gardening, where initially he seems to be have contradictory idea about vegetable cultivation, or he rather wished to have hot dogs or pristine wine. On the month of April, he would look at the garden anticipating that he will ripe his harvest in the spring. But to no avail, he would face the same result. Whenever he thought of giving up, the sun would arise the next day, giving him a beautiful glimpse of his garden, wafting the earth-like smells that keeps him going. He uses various tricks and methods of projects in his garden, like he uses black plastic to cover the crops that he would keep our wets and keep the soil moist. However, he finds unromantic and industrial look. Therefore, organically he uses hay instead of chemical fertilizer. Despite of various methods, his crops prefers growing in the particular corner of the 50s by 70s food patches that must have been dozens of different types of soil. Keeping a garden makes him realize how delicate and easily ruined the earth's surface can be. Further, he continued his ideas of gardening, which for a certain gardener is of emotional and moral ground. The healthy growth, the orderliness, and trusting life in the garden reflects. Similar movement in the gardener own spirit, the parental and maternal instincts, natural comes into play to look after the helpless living things, protect them from the enemies. Gardening is a moral occupation for the offspring. The garden is entitled to caring and nurturing, like his wife, the mistress of the garden, who thinks and cultivates tiny plants, keeps the gardens neat as well as his mother-in-law, an 86 years old botanist, scripturally checking out the garden and eventually before her, despite gives her suggestions of growing tomato that would get fungi it cultivated in the dump soil. Few sight of garden gratify him as they glitter and glistens in the morning sun, for lovelier in fact than rows of hot dogs. He considers gardening a character building since it is a continuous process. He took the examples of Adam, who was also a gardener, also a fall of man. He remorses led him to build a character much to want what we express now. A father by professions can be mason, weaver, shoemaker, or anything but the gardener, because it is a few professions of endless hope and endeavor, regardless of drought, flood, ruffians, or own stupidity. It is God, he thinks, who decides who is capable, and that everything is preordinated. The concluding lines, however, he honestly shake exemplify a tone of sobriety and gloomliness, with the hope of as a month of winter is often disconsolate and trainee personified.
இந்த வீடியோ உங்களுக்கு பிடிச்சிருந்தா மறக்காமல் லைக் பண்ணுங்கள், ஷேர் பண்ணுங்கள், கமெண்ட் பண்ணுங்கள், சப்ஸ்கிரைப் பண்ணி கூட இருக்க பெல் ஐக்கானையும் ப்ரெஸ் பண்ணுங்கள். தேங்க்யூ ஃபார் வாட்சிங்.